I have lost my mouse, so no promises for how this editing is going to turn out. Where are all the men? Not you, Amaro. So where are all the men? It might sound weird, but it is a question that gets asked. Because if you look at the communities and the research, it is predominantly female. I think I've seen like one, maybe two studies on maladaptive daydreaming where men weren't outnumbered by women, usually by quite a large margin. And if you look at the community survey on Reddit, which now has over 40,000 members, it's almost 70% female. I even looked at my YouTube analytics to see who was watching me. In the last 28 days, 100% of you have been female. Not that my YouTube reflects much, but in case you were wondering. So it's pretty reasonable for one to maybe come to the conclusion that maladaptive daydreaming affects women more than it affects men. But we don't actually know that. There's actually a few reasons why women might be overrepresented that don't necessarily point to women being affected more. It's possible they are, or affected more severely. But when you're looking at all this information, it's helpful to keep in mind how they're getting their information. And how they're getting it is online. They aren't recruiting people from, brick and mortar psychiatric practices. They're recruiting them from our online communities. So it may just be that those identifying as the female gender reach out to those communities more often, are more likely to seek them out and participate in them and be active in them and respond to calls for participation in them. And I mean, that could be for any number of reasons. I'm not a sociologist or anything, but I think most of us would agree that little boys and girls are socialized differently, and that might not always lead out to the best mental health outcomes for one or the other. It doesn't seem far-fetched to assume that perhaps in some or maybe even a lot of cases, men feel discouraged about reaching out, joining communities, admitting there's a problem, or seeking help for it. And the studies do address this in every study that's published, the peer-reviewed ones anyway. There's a little paragraph of limitations, and a couple of them have addressed like the gender gap here. This one, for example, says our final sample comprised of a large portion of females. Although females could be overrepresented among MDers, future research should strive to include more males. And in another, as is true in any self-selected population, there is no way to determine how representative our sample was of the proposed population. It can be presumed that the higher number of respondents under the age of 40 may well be due to the higher likelihood of this age group to spend time online, or they're simply being more forthcoming about sharing personal information. We also have no way of accounting for the much higher proportion of female participants. So even in the research, they're not really speculating too much about why, at least not yet. And I have not seen yet, either published or in press or even proposed, a study directed just at that gender gap. MD is not the only condition that this happens in, though. It comes up for other disorders that have a lot more research backing them. Girls being diagnosed less for ADHD, for example. Like I said, I'm not a professional. I don't want to speculate too much on why this is, but I did just kind of want to let everybody out there know that it's not a certainty by any means that men are affected less by maladaptive daydreaming. And I do hope to any men who might happen to watch this that you don't feel put out of the community or out of place. We are all maladaptive daydreamers first, and we are all here to support one another. And even though they may be slightly less common, there are a lot of men out there. And if you would like to see more of the male perspective on maladaptive daydreaming, I'm going to try to throw up some little card thingies on the screen here that will direct you to some YouTube channels centered around maladaptive daydreaming run by men.